Call her what you will. Mom, mommy, mother, mama bear, mumsy, or something that's one of a kind special for just you and your family. Some are our birth mothers, some adoptive. Some come along and fill that space when another has left. However they come to us and whatever we call them, mom is a very special person. When our mother dies, there isn't another loss that's quite like it. And that's decidedly true for women. And the gap between a mom's sure presence with us and the ability to connect with them after their death can be vast. We are on the cusp of Mother's Day, time to honor and celebrate mom that makes the pain of her absence even more. I'm really glad that each of you are with us here on Understanding Grief, Grieving Mother's Day. I invite you, use the chat box for questions or comments. Maybe add your mom's name or a picture or something to create a scroll of honor. We'll create a memorial here to honor them by naming them that will be in this space for forever. Hope Edelman is with us this evening to open up this special loss and to help us engage with the grief that we have staring down this pathway towards Mother's Day. Hope is a prolific author. She's put together 7 books. She's an expert and experienced in the world of what it means to be a motherless daughter. And Hope, I am just so grateful and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Galen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hope, tell us about your story. For those who are not familiar with it, you've become an expert at this in a pretty hard and difficult way.
I have, yeah. I was 17 years old when my mother died of breast cancer. It was in 1981, and there were no grief support services, but also there was no information available for girls who'd lost a mom. Families just kind of soldiered on, tried to get back to the status quo. And so after the funeral, there was very little talk about grief, no space to express our emotions. And there was no support services for families. So I went looking for a book, and I looked for a book for 10 years for girls like me, and I couldn't find one. And eventually I was in a graduate program for writing, and I decided to write it. And that became Motherless Daughters, which was my first book. And it's now out in 17 countries around the world.
Wow.
And it spawned a whole movement. And we have weekly support group calls for women who lost mothers at any age. And I lead retreats in person for women who were children, teenagers, and young adults when their mothers died, because they really find solace in spending time together to get their stories and their feelings and their thoughts validated and normalized.
Yeah, that's that sense of support and breaking down that sense of alienation and being by myself in this is so important. I'm so glad you have put all that together, and obviously it's a great need because women are responding to that. Yeah. So in responding, what is that special experience of mother loss for women?
Well, I think we need to divide it into 2 categories. Let's start with women who have a close, warm, loving relationship with their mother. It is the loss of that nurturing presence in your life. It is true that no one will love you quite the way your mother does. A lot of adult women depend on their mothers in many ways. She may play multiple roles in their life.
Right.
She's a mother, but she may also be a confidant. She may be a support, either, emotionally, practically, financially. She may be a grandmother to your children. She may be a mother-in-law to your spouse or your partner. And so we're grieving not just the role of a mom when she dies, but whatever other roles she played in our lives as well. Now, for women who have complicated relationships with their moms, or maybe even estranged from their moms, losing their mom is still the loss of the same-sex role model, which is so important when you're a child or a teenager. We may have people watching or listening who were young when their moms died. And maybe their mother would have been the parent who had guided them through different developmental challenges or tasks when they were younger.
Sure.
So if your mother died or she was unavailable to be there for you in that way, you may have experienced developmental gaps that you carried into adulthood. But if you had a complicated relationship with your mom, or you were estranged from her and then she dies, there is the lost hope that you will ever be able to have the kind of relationship that you wished you could have had. Or the hope that she would be able to become the mom or the woman that would have fulfilled her potential.
Wow, that is a lot. That's a lot. And what kinds of things do you find women doing to when they notice this, or to respond? Are there particular things that they do that or that you can suggest that people can do to respond to that when they, if you will, sort of wake up to that?
Well, with regard to developmental gaps, it is
Yeah.
never too late to learn how to, to mature those parts of
Right.
ourselves. It is very common if you're a child or teenager when your mom died to feel like a part of you got stuck or frozen at that age. That part of you will go on and develop, along developmental lines. A part of you may have to grow up very fast and take on more responsibility for yourself or the household or siblings. But a part of you may feel emotionally like it got stuck at that age. And what does get stuck at that age in your mind is your relationship with your mom, because you'll still be relating to her in memory as an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 20-year-old, even though you may be decades beyond that now. So psychoeducation, becoming aware that this is possible and real and happens and very common, can be enormously helpful as a starting point. And then to work through it with a therapist or in a support group or in the community of Motherless Daughters that is out there. We have all kinds of programs and courses and support groups and live events and free events online that women can tap into so that they can learn more about this and also start interacting with other women who can really understand what they've been through.
Yeah. Yeah. You found kind of, this is my language. You found kind of footing, I would guess, to say, sort of stability with writing to do this. That was you mentioned that early on and
Right.
everything. Do you find that really helpful for other people as well?
I do, for a couple of reasons, but I found it to be a very valuable form of self-expression because I came from a family that didn't talk about my mother's death.
Oh,
So
okay.
I didn't give myself permission to talk about it until I started really writing the book and then interviewing other women and then writing my story. But when we tell our story, and writing is one way to tell our story, therapy is another way to tell our story, support group is another way to tell our story. But when we write our stories, we start making sense of it in a new and different way. We're linking events across time in a cause and effect manner. We may see connections that we didn't see when we were younger. We are at different points in our life looking back at the same set of events, maybe seeing them a little differently because we have more maturity, we have more experience, we have more insights. But telling your story is a really important, I think it's an important component of healing. And sure, it can be done through writing. I teach writing courses that are mostly for motherless daughters who come to write their stories of loss. I teach them online, starting a new one this fall. It's called Writing with Hope. There's 4 sequences. And we have 2 women who finished their books, just in those 4 sequences. And we're hopeful that they'll start, they may even get them published.
Yeah. Yeah. Do all of the people that like start writing about their stories and everything, does it have to end up in a book?
No, of course not. Some of them just take the first or the second course because they want to, revisit these facts, or they're doing it to heal. They're doing it as a form of self-expression. Others are doing it because they want to have a creative product to put out in the world and everything in between. Some people are writing it to share it with their children so that their children will know their story and their mom's story.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. That seems really cool to get that written down, to carry that history and the legacy on together. Because a lot of times that's what we feel has been lost
Yeah.
when when a mom dies and everything. And just from my own perspective, when my mom died, there was a lot of history of when I was a little kid that I don't necessarily remember, that every once in a while she'd drop a story in there about something I did when I was tiny that is gone. And so to get that down, that must be really encouraging and helpful for people.
It can be. It can be. I hope one day my daughters will read my books and learn about my mom and my relationship with my mom. I mean, I talk about her all the time, but
Sure.
still, they'll learn more by reading the books.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. What would you say to people who might come to you and say, well, I don't write or whatever? Is there, and you mentioned, the writing or the support group or therapy and stuff, would you encourage somebody to find another avenue then to express that and to bring that out? And
Yes, absolutely. You can write, you can dance, you can sing, you can paint, you can draw, you can, any form of self-expression can create what we call a pathway for grief, an outlet where you can alchemize it or transform it into something really beautiful.
Yeah. I love that word that you've used. I've used that one before, that alchemize that's something that we don't think about oftentimes and everything, but it's this intermixture of things that come together that bring about something completely new. I mean, the idea of alchemy is bringing gold out of I think it was iron or something or whatever, but transforming it, and that is such a great word that allows this relationship and the gaps within it to be able to be something new. Yeah. Yeah. How wonderful is that? Do you find yourself going back maybe and, so you've written 8 books and worked with this for a long time, but do you find yourself still going back and touching on things that you maybe did in the first book or a second one or something like that and seeing it in a whole new way?
Absolutely. And I had the extraordinary experience and the rare experience of getting to revise Motherless Daughters twice.
Oh, wow.
Different points in my life, because we kept updating it and, with
Sure.
new information that came out, with what readers were asking for more of, with research that had, come out since the first book. Now, the first edition was published in 1994.
Okay.
I was single, living in New York. I was 29 years old. I didn't have children yet. I
Right.
was still quite close to my mother's death. It was about 12, 13 years later. And I wrote the book from the perspective of a woman who was still trying to figure out what this was going to mean for the rest of her life. I went on a journey with the readers, and they learned with me. When I updated the book, it was 12 years later, I was 41. I was about to turn the age my mother was when she died. I was now married. I had 2 children, young children, that I was, 2 daughters. And that's a very, very significant transition for women to make. When we lose a mother who's young, to grow older than she was and to be older than your mother got to. Now, a lot of women do that in their 70s, their 80s, even their 90s. But the population of women I work with get there in their 30s and their 40s.
Right.
My mother was 42 when she died. That's very young. So at 41, I revised Motherless Daughters, and I was on the brink of that transition. And so I saw the world differently as a mother myself. So that got into and also my father had passed away by that point. He was still living in the first edition. So I had a whole different experience now, having lost both parents. When I revised it for the 3rd time, I was 50. And I was on the other side of so many things that I had been afraid of. And my daughter that year turned 17, which was the age I was when my mother died, which is also a very significant transition.
Wow.
A very important threshold that women cross. But I found that the 50-year-old me was not the right one to tell this story, because I wasn't worried about the things that my readers were worried about anymore, because I had already, done them.
Sure.
And so I let the voice of the 41-year-old continue to narrate the book, but I do have an epilogue at the end where I could talk about, where I talked about how different things were now, on the other side. So so yes, I do look back at the same set of events and think of them differently all the time. And now I'm how many years older? 16 years older than my mother got to be. And that's just shocking to me. It is absolutely shocking that she was that, because the older I get, the younger she is.
Oh, what a beautiful way to put that. You're right. You're right. And do you find yourself when you bump up against those moments and things, do you find yourself maybe grieving or having an emotional experience about, gee, I wonder what mom would have felt with this, or what would her have thought have been, or things like that? Is that common?
Sometimes, but see, my mother, as I remember her, was 42 when she died in the 1980s. So I don't think so much about what would my mom think of this 42-year-old mother. I tend to think of, if my mother had lived, how might she have changed, and in what ways might she advise me now? But that's very theoretical, because
Sure.
the more, the more, like I said, the older that I get, the further she recedes into the past.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that my 42-year-old mom would have had good advice for me at this time in my life. I just don't know.
Yeah, right. But I think one of the things that this points out, and I love the way that you're talking about this, is that ongoing nature of grief.
Oh, yeah.
And the continued relationship that you have with your mom. You may not know the full, exact, identities that she would have and share with you today,
Right.
by any means, because she would have continued to live and grown and interacted with her own experiences. But you still have that kind of relationship with her that goes on with grief, and grief doesn't ever come to an end in a full-on way like we sometimes think that it should, or we maybe have been taught that it would.
Yeah. Well, that's what my most recent book is about. It's called The After Grief: Finding Your Way Along the Long Arc of Loss. And that's the premise, is that after we get through the acute phase of grief, some people that's 6 months, for some it's a year, for some it's 2 years. It's individual. It depends on so many factors: who died, how they died, what your relationship with them was like. We move into what I call the after grief, which is this other phase. Nobody really talks about grief being in 5 stages anymore. Two phases: the phase where you feel really bad, which is acute grief, and the phase where you start feeling better and creating a new normal. That's the after grief.
Right.
But it is not at all uncommon 10 or 20 years later to have a very painful resurgence of grief. And it can be around a calendar event like Mother's Day coming up, or Father's Day, or it can be because you see someone in a crowd who from the back looks just like your loved one who died. And it just, you have that catch, and the emotions come up again, and that can happen decades later. And it doesn't mean that you grieved wrong. It means that you're a human having a grief experience, because it is a lifelong process.
Yeah, lifelong process, and a lifelong relationship. That love is never ends.
Exactly. And your relationship with that person will change over time. My relationship with my mom now, as such a young woman, is really different than my relationship with her just a few years after she died. In my heart, I mean, when we talk about continuing relationships or continuing bonds, we tend to think, okay, you're going to find a place to locate that person and have a relationship with them, and then carry them forward, and that relationship will be fixed. But that's not true. That relationship changes all the time. I work with women all the time who learn things about their mom 20 years after she died that they never knew, and it changes the way they think about her, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I stumbled across some letters that my mom had written prior to getting married, and going through some of her stuff. My mom died several years ago, and still have some of that stuff. You slowly but surely get rid of stuff and the things, and ran across them. And the things that I learned about my mom, and it was very, very interesting to me. And it broadened the picture of her. And I guess I would say, and is would this be kind of an example of people, as you continue to remember that continuing bond that goes on of that relationship? Is this sort of an answer to people who say, I'm so afraid of forgetting my mom?
I think, people legitimately are afraid. I'm going to forget the
Sure.
sound of her voice. I'm going to forget the sound
Sure.
of her laugh. I mean, I don't have my mother on video with any
Right.
sound. So I don't remember the sound of her voice, and there's no way to recapture it. But I mean, now we have a lot more, of course. We have iPhone videos.
Yeah, sure.
And photos and everything. But I think people are afraid that they will forget what it felt like to be in her presence,
Right.
her physical presence. And that does change over time because you develop a relationship with her, inside, and her memory and her legacy. And so it will feel different. It just
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
It's
And-
interesting, when we often remember what it feels like in dreams. Do you ever have dreams sometimes about a departed loved one or anyone, and you have an emotion in the dream and you wake
Right.
up and you're still feeling it? I hear
Right.
from a lot of women who say it's so nice for them when they see their mom in a dream and they can remember what it felt like to be in her presence, like the body holds that memory
It sure does.
and then it lasts into the day.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons dreams are so important and helpful to us and everything, because they encapsulate that emotion and pull it out and then rest it into our body again. Becomes a very helpful thing. Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this about, as we are coming to this this weekend and the experience of Mother's Day, and people are running around and they're going to be going to restaurants and and sending cards and all that stuff. What would you suggest to women who are acutely aware of the absence of their mother this weekend?
Well, first of all, I would suggest, if you are feeling that this might be a tender or vulnerable weekend for you, to stay off social media for a day or two,
Sure.
because that's where everyone's going to be posting the photos of them with their mom, the tributes to their mom. And if that might be triggering or upsetting to you, I would just recommend take a break from social media. It might be nice in other ways
Yeah.
too. Also, it's good to have a plan for the day.
Yep.
If you're thinking about it, like, especially if it's your first Mother's Day without your mom, even if it's just one small thing you're going to do that day, that might make you feel better. It's okay to change the plan when you wake up that morning, but having a plan helps you feel like you have some control over the day and it's not going to control you.
Yeah.
And that can be really helpful too. I always say to women, think about a value or a virtue that your mother embodied that you admire and want to carry forward in the world. And think of some small way that you can actualize that, whatever that is. If your mom liked to cook, make breakfast for your family or your neighbors. If your mom liked to garden, maybe planting is not your thing, but buy some fresh flowers and arrange them in the house for yourself, just so you can have the beauty of nature surrounding you. I know this is silly, but my mom loved houseplants. I make sure I water my houseplants Mother's Day, because I think my mom tended to her houseplants. I'm going to make sure mine have good water. She was a musician, so sometimes I'll play classical music in the background while I'm getting ready for the day, just to so I can hear Chopin, who she'd play on the piano. Or she also was a very altruistic person. My mom, she did a lot of volunteer work. And what I do every Mother's Day is I interface with other motherless daughters. I answer a couple of emails. I do some social media posts, to help them get through the day. And I do that in memory of my mom on that day in particular, because she was all about helping to reduce suffering in the world.
Yeah. Those are beautiful tributes. Yeah. I know, one of the common things, and I put it on here tonight, I think people can see it with my white carnation. That's one of the things that just says, I'm remembering my mom who's deceased. The white identifies a deceased mom, and red ones are pretty regularly given for moms who are still living and all. So, there are so many ways, and I always just encourage people to kind of follow their heart. What does your heart feel like doing? I can imagine, all of the stuff that you mentioned. You said because mom did this and everything, and those things, and they just sort of naturally have flowed out of you.
And I want to impress upon listeners too that sometimes avoidance can be a very valuable form of self.
Yes.
If you're just feeling like you do not want to put on a happy face on Sunday and you just
Yep.
don't feel up to it, maybe you're drained emotionally, or maybe, you just your mom just died and you're, just grieving, and there's nothing about this day that's going to make you feel better. If you want to act or pretend like it's just an ordinary day, stay home, stay off social media, do your normal stuff, maybe, or go out, just go grocery shopping or whatever it is.
Yep.
That's fine. Wherever you are is okay. It's where you need to be. And just because you're doing that this year doesn't mean that you're going to want to do it every year.
Right.
Mother's Day is going to be different. Every, revolution around the sun brings with it 364 days of experience.
Yes.
You can bring to your next Mother's Day. They're all going to be different.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, no, I know that you have something coming up this Saturday, a very special thing. Hope, tell us about that you've got, and we're going to put that in the chat box too. So
every year, Claire Bidwell Smith, she's a therapist and author, dear colleague of mine, and I host a worldwide gathering online for Motherless Daughters, because it's not just Mother's Day in the US, it's Mother's Day in Australia and in Canada and in several countries in Europe. And we have hundreds of women from all over the world coming together. We do a discussion, a Q&A, we do a toast to our moms, we do what's called a circle of remembrance. It's a signature feature of any Motherless Daughters live event. And we give women a place where they can come and just feel like they're not alone on this weekend. And we have more than 800 women who've signed up so far.
Great.
It's an extraordinary experience to be on the screen with that many women who understand how you're feeling this weekend. So, and we come to honor our mothers. That's what it's for. It's not just to find comfort or solace. It's to say, hey, we're creating a space this weekend for mothers who are no longer living, because Sunday is so much about moms who are living and celebrating them or contacting them or, toasting them, eating them, calling them. We can't do any of those things. So we create a space this weekend, and we don't do it on Mother's Day because so much of our population, so many women are mothers themselves, and they always want to do something for them. Right. So we always do it the day before Mother's Day.
Right. Wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, Hope, this is marvelous. And I just am so grateful for your work and your response to your loss that has grown in such a way that that so many people have been able to find that comfortable in that safe space to say and do what they need to do to be able to process this, in very unique kind of loss and experience, and that you've continued to go forward with that. We're so grateful in our world to have you and for the work that you have done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Galen, and thank you for all the good work that you do in this space as well.
Oh, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. There's been a lot here this evening that is a part of this video, and I want to encourage you to return to this from time to time. You're not going to be able to remember everything. It's part of what grief does and everything, but that's the beauty of this recording. So come back, view it again, share it with your family, those people that are having struggles as well. And if you open up your grief experience, I do believe that you will find important persons who will journey with you and travel with you. And those are some of the important ways that we make our way through. So I hope you find this great helpful information here. And I want to say thank you, as I always do, to my colleague Jessica for monitoring the feed and the page. I invite you to follow us on Facebook so that we can be together in your journey through grief. And at this time, we want to send you peace as you grieve your loss. Thank you and have a good day.